Very excited to welcome in Nick Alberga for his show debut. First time on Daily Faceoff Live. And we're going to talk a little fantasy hockey today, delivered by our friends over at DoorDash. Nick, a good spot to start is at the top of drafts. I think a lot of people would assume, Connor McDavid's going number one. Maybe they would assume Matthews is going two. Who would you have in that three spot?
It's interesting, right? It depends, and it's all subjective on lists, right? A lot of people have Leon Draisaitl ahead of Connor McDavid. Some people have Matthews, as you mentioned, at number two. For me, it would be Matthews at number three, but, just to make the argument, I think you understand why it's really, really close between, say, an Austin Matthews and a Leon Draisaitl. I just think from a category coverage standpoint, there's just a bit more to extract from a guy like Draisaitl, specifically the attachment to Connor McDavid on the power play. So that's probably why I lean more so in the direction of Draisaitl than I do Matthews at number two.
Nick, leagues are won and lost every year on guys that you were able to pick up late in rounds 8, 9, 10. The sleepers, who are some guys that make your list as your favorite sleepers this year?
Yeah, it's all about extracting value. You're right on that, Frank. And ultimately, my top guy, I look right to the Detroit Red Wings, who we think are taking the next step this season in the Atlantic Division. I'm looking at Jacob Vrana, of course, as you see on the board right there. In 37 total games now with Detroit, he has 21 goals. You prorate that in 82 games, that's a 47-goal pace. Now, I'm not saying he's going to score at that pace, but still, it's really, really good value when you're getting him in your draft around 110 to 120. So I would look at him. Another guy I would look at, you just talked about Vegas. How about former Vegas Golden Knight, Alex Tuch, now with the Buffalo Sabres, potentially? Could he be the new captain of the team? We'll find out on that front. But I think there's a lot of value for a guy like Tuch playing in that top six. In 50 total games last year with Buffalo, he had 38 points, 12 goals. You prorate that over 82, it's around a 60-point pace. So I think obviously there's a lot of value in him. And the last guy you see on your screen is Tyler Toffoli. You talk about plum assignments. He's going to get the opportunity to play in that top line with the Calgary Flames, knows Daryl Sutter really, really well. So Toffoli's a guy I would really, really circle because I like his value at that position.
Kind of similar question here for me, but who are some players that maybe fantasy owners should be looking at, who were disappointing last year, but could bounce back? Like I think back to last year, guys like Duchesne, Johansson, even a Vlad Tarasenko didn't have very high stock heading into the draft, but they were lights out all season. Who are some potential bounce back candidates in your opinion?
Yeah, exactly. Like the drafts are all about extracting value. And when you can hit on a bounce back candidate, you have to be all over it. And it puts your position and your roster in a really, really good shape to go far. I like what Frank said earlier about the Winnipeg Jets. I'm all over the Jets this season. I have Rick Bowness to win my Jack Adams trophy. I feel that highly about them. I think they're going to make the Stanley Cup playoffs. And where I'm going with this is Connor Hellebuck and a bounce back season in between the pipes for him with the Winnipeg Jets. It's easy to forget. He's just 2 years removed from winning the Vezina Trophy. So I expect that. A couple other guys I would look at on the back end, staying consistent with the trade conversation. Jacob Chikrin is a guy who clearly wants out of Arizona. I think will play his very best to get out of that market and land elsewhere. And I think when he does, I think he's going to land some significant fantasy value. So I would look at him and also Dougie Hamilton, who I've been all over in my draft so far here in this fantasy season. I just think there's a lot of value with this player. He had 7 goals, 20 points in his first 30 games last year before he breaks his jaw, before he hurts his toe. So players like that who are coming off mega contracts, usually in their first year, that struggle, I think they're prime candidates for bounce back seasons.
Just quickly, because we have a couple extra minutes here, Nick. We're
Yeah.
about to dig into the Calder Trophy in our inbox question. Who are some rookies who you're eyeing up from a fantasy perspective this year?
So if you want to handicap things, I think Matty Beniers is the guy to beat. I know there's been a lot of conversation about Mason McTavish, but you look at the body of work so far of Beniers. I'm not sure if you guys caught the goal last night. Like this guy's elite, elite, elite already. He's going to center that top line. I'm not crazy about playing with Donato and Bjorkstrand, but again, I don't put too much stock into training camp lines. I think once the season starts, we'll see a bit more in terms of what Dave Haxtell and company are thinking about there in Seattle. So Beniers would be my front runner in fantasy. I think he should be the first rookie drafted off the board. I'm taking nothing away from some of the defensemen, guys like Power and Jake Sanderson to an extent. Cale Addison is a big time sleeper with the Minnesota Wild, especially if he continues to run that first power play unit. And other looks I would give Mason McTavish, although right now he's playing on the third line at PP2. And as Frank mentioned earlier on, Logan Thompson, he's a bit longer in the tooth. Of course, took him longer to be a perennial guy in this league, but he's going to be the number one for the Vegas Golden Knights. I still have questions, but I think if you're looking for starts, I think you look there with Logan Thompson.
Nick,
Nick,
when you look at the goaltending, real quick before you go, you mentioned it's such a difficult position to predict. Excuse me, Hellebuck having a big bounce back. Who are some of the other guys that you're looking for this year to be better that maybe struggled a bit last year?
Yeah, it's an extremely volatile position in general, right, Frank? I think when you're sifting through goaltenders to look at in fantasy hockey, I think even to an extent, you mentioned it earlier with contract years, Semyon Varlamov. Like I know Ilya Sorokin is going to be the number one with that team, but I would look for better numbers from a guy like Varlamov. I think you even look to New Jersey's crease like Vitek Vanacek. Even to an extent in Toronto, I think you can find a lot of value in Matt Murray and Ilya Samsonov. Just doing a couple of my drafts early on, it seems like people are scared beyond belief to even go near Toronto's net mining, where there's some people who think Toronto's going to miss completely. There's some who think Toronto's not going to skip a beat. So I think you have to think along those lines because you're going to have your guys atop the list, Jacob Markstrom, Vasilevsky, Shesterkin, Sorokin, Saros. Like there's guys who are legit. And then there are guys that were maybe looking to take that next step or bounce back off disappointing seasons. But long story short, I think you'll be able to find a lot of value in your crease if you're patient in your draft.
Nick, appreciate the insight as always. This segment delivered by our friends at DoorDash, where you can use the promo code GameDay25 to get 25% off and no delivery fees on your first order. Nick's going to be handling a lot of Leafs content, a lot of fantasy hockey content. So we look forward to chatting with you throughout the year, man.
A little foreshadowing potentially for tomorrow. You never know. Take care, guys.